Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Monday, the 21st of March, 2022. Thank you for tuning in. Glad to have you guys here. Well, I tell you, maybe I'll tell you guys a story. There's an old guy sitting on a bench. A young guy walked up to him, sat next to him, and he said, what are you doing? And the old fella said, well, I'm sitting here relaxing, and both of them got talking, you know. And the young guy bought the old guy a cup of coffee, and they started to chat, and they got to be friends real quick. And that happens once in a while, People who don't know each other will sit down next to each other and make friends. This is what happened. Made friends just like in 15 minutes, And the old fella says, he says, I just get out of secret programs within the government and stuff, he said. He said, things you've never heard of before to the young guy. Young guy got really interested. He said, well, gee, that sounds interesting. What kind of secret? He says, I'm not really supposed to talk about these things. He said, but this is really troubled times right now, he said. The world is on the verge of something very, very bad. And they got talking, and the old fellow started to slip on a few of the secret programs he was working on and stuff. And he says to the young guy, he says, you know what the whole problem in the world right now is? The old guy says. The young guy says, no, what? The old guy says, the world is not what you think it is. He says, do you know anything about time-space? The young guy says, no, I don't know anything about time. He says, well, in these secret programs I work in things like theoretical physics. The old guy says, and I work on things like time-space and things like that. He says, what I've learned is that time itself is nonlinear. And the guy says, what? What does that mean? And the old guy says, well, you know how we picture time like flowing like a river down from one point to the next point in time? He says, that's not the way it is, the old fellow says. In reality, time-space in the multiverse, time is nonlinear, he said. He said, at least in this universe, it's not linear. The young guy says, okay, but what does that mean, nonlinear? Well, what it means, the old fellow says, is that time is actually a loop. It goes around in a circle, and it comes back around to the starting point where it originated. And he says, these loops are what you would refer to as a great year. A little bit more than 25,000 years long to complete a loop. And the old fellow goes on to talk. He says, picture in your mind a slinky toy. It's got all these loops. Each loop's connected to the next loop at a certain point. It makes like a spring. You ever looked at a spring closely, the old fellow says? The young guy says, well, no, not... Well, yeah, I kind of know what a spring looks like. It's a series of loops, and they're all interconnected. Yes, the old fellow says that's what time is like. It's like these interconnected loops. And he says, at a certain point, they have a convergence point where the loops all come together. And he says, in the multiverse, in the universe, he says, they all come together at a certain point on this time loop, the old fellow says. And this is called a convergence. The young fellow says, I've never heard of this before. What's it all about? Well, the old fellow says, it's what's referred to as the end times, or the end of time, or the end times. Have you heard of that before? The guy says, yeah, well, sort of. Isn't that kind of... The young guy says, isn't that kind of like stuff that's in the Bible or something, end times? Yeah, the old fellow says, this is all connected together. History, the Bible, a lot of other ancient texts and documents, it's all connected together. But what it is all really about the end times and a convergence. A convergence of events that create the end times, he says to the young guy. The young guy's taken back a little bit. Well, the young guy says, well, when does this convergence happen and all of these events all come together at a specific spot? And the old guy says, very soon, he said. According to our theoretical physics, that's what we're in right now, is this convergence. This is what's happening. He says it started in 2012. His young guy says, well, I've heard of that. 2012? Isn't that the Mayan prophecies or something? Or the end of the world or the end of time? The guy says, yes, exactly right. And that's when it began. It was 2012. But it's culminating very, very soon. Young guy gets, what do you mean, culminating? Well, the old guy says, well, it's like this. This is a convergence of events that all precede something really huge. And there's so many different possibilities that all come together. All of these loops come together at a specific point. Now, you're going to have to see what this is like, you're going to have to kind of see it in your mind. See it as the road that we've been on leading up until this point is like a road or a highway. And it's like, and what's coming up just ahead in this convergence is more than just a fork in the road. It's like a whole bunch of roads go off in a whole bunch of different directions. And this represents many different possibilities of what could happen directly ahead. Some of them might be good, and some of them might be terribly bad. But then when you pass that point in time, you're moving into something new, and the road will straighten back out again, become one road again. Once you pass this convergence of these time loops coming together, in other words, the end of time, you go pip onto the beginning of time. To start again. A new fresh start. And the guy says, I don't really understand. Even though I'm trying to picture it in my mind, but it's difficult, he says. What does it mean for all of us out here in the world? The old guy says, well, I don't really exactly know. But it's big. Really big. And what'll exactly happen, I don't really know. We might all die. Or we might all not feel anything at all as we move into this new period in time. It's unknown. Or the events that might happen is unknown from this point forward because we're at the convergence. He says, theoretically, one can figure out when you're on one road in time and on one loop and you're moving from the forward in that direction, kind of like a 45 RPM record when your needle of the record is in the groove and it's going around the circle of the record, you can kind of know what's coming next by listening to the music. But when you hit this convergence, it's like the needle jumps on the record. It moves into a new groove. The young guy says, the young guy says, well, what is actually going to happen from all of this? The old guy says, well, something really big is coming our way. And I can't tell you exactly for sure, but it's going to yield some sort of an awakening to mankind. And mankind is going to wake up from this dream and come to a realization of a lot of the things that... And the old guy says, well, I don't really know exactly for sure, to the young man, what's going to actually happen. All I know is this is really big. Are you scared? He says to the young man. The young man says, well, no, not really, because I don't really understand it, or why it's so big. And they both sit there and drink their coffee for a little while. And he says, well, it was nice meeting you, young man. And he shakes his hand. And he says, good luck to you. I hope it all goes well for you through this convergence. The young man's got a little bit of a puzzled look on his face, you know. And he says, well, thanks for telling me about this stuff, but I don't really understand any of it. What should I do about this? And the old fella says, well, as he's parting and walking away, he says, well, listen, there's not really a whole lot you can do. This is bigger than you, and it's bigger than me, and it's bigger than this whole world. Thank you guys for listening and to this little fiction that I talked about just now. And we'll catch you guys in the very next show. Bye-bye.